Welcome to another episode of Atlantic Talks, a space for sustainability, entrepreneurs, smart cities, the bike industry, and more. Our Atlantic Talks are sponsored by our sustainable partners, GoParity. GoParity is an impact investment platform designed for funding sustainable projects. People and companies can join and invest in these sustainable projects. If you want to start investing today, add our promo code AtlanticBikes5 and get a €5 credit. Today, we have a very special guest. His name is Jeremy Backlar. He is the founder, together with Carolina Backlar, of the Atelier Backlar, an architecture firm established in Lisbon and the Azores, Portugal. Atelier Backlar designs, creates, and implements unique architecture projects involving sustainability. Their portfolio goes from sustainable housing and offices to public spaces and community architecture. In the last months, Atelier Backlar presented in the Milan Design Week a project titled Community Capsule. So tonight we have our dear friend Jeremy here with us. Hello, Jeremy. How are you?
Hi, Roberto. Thanks for having me.
I hope you're doing fine. And Lisbon weather is getting better all the time, no?
Lisbon is excellent. Perhaps due to global warming, but it's quite nice out there.
It's quite nice. It's a beautiful city. I really enjoy being there. Was there last month. Beautiful place for the eVelocity conference, and we'll be there soon as well. So, Jeremy, we have some questions regarding the community capsule. We'd like to start on how this project was conceived. Did you guys get a call to action because of a certain problem you found, or it was just one project you had in mind for this competition?
Actually, it started 8 years ago. When we first created our company, we'd left London and from these sort of larger design firms, and we decided to kind of break out and do our own thing. And we understood that they were we didn't really know anybody in Lisbon, so we decided to literally invent projects, this being one of them. And we had the chance to run into a company that was currently, and still does, takes sort of disused recycled plastic, specifically the plastics that aren't able to be recycled.
The most hardest plastic to recycle. So they take the plastic that is not being really recycled, let's say.
That's right. Yeah. So when you look on the bottom of a plastic bottle, there's this little recycle symbol, and then there's numbers 1 through 8.
Okay.
And the reality, unfortunately, is that you can only really recycle, or they only commonly recycle numbers 1 and 2. The rest of it usually ends up just being sent to the landfill. But what this company does is that they're not recycling it for, let's say, prime materials. They're not turning it into soda bottles or anything consumable. They're using this plastic. They're essentially casting it into these long strips, sort of like wood dimensional strips, and used for the building industry, which worked really well for us. We were very interested in this because plastics actually has many positive attributes that we could be using in architecture, especially dealing with rot and humidity and thermal breaks and these kinds of things.
It's definitely a great isolator, right? Like, you can really isolate and keep structures warm, for example.
It keeps them warm, that's right. And they don't rot. For instance, wood is fantastic material, but, obviously when it runs into the ground, you have lots of issues.
It needs a lot of maintenance as well. With plastic, maybe nothing.
It does. Plastic. So in this case, we were interested in using all the parts that we hate about plastic, the fact that it doesn't degrade and the fact that it doesn't decompose, and using that to its advantage and putting it into a system, perhaps a building or a piece of furniture that will be there for many decades instead of sort of like a single use piece.
So we usually talk about plastic, especially this kind of plastic, the non-recyclable plastic. Yeah. And we said that this plastic will be on Earth for hundreds of years, thousands of years, 1,000 years.
That's right.
So when we build buildings, let's say houses, churches, we build it with intention for it to last thousands of years.
That's right.
So maybe plastic could be the answer for this.
Well, a lot of people are already starting to use it, and we're sort of trying to do our small investigations ourselves. We've even started to use it on some of our construction sites in the Azores, which we, from our research, and we're feeling pretty good about this, that it's going to have a really good effect because of the high humidity content over there. And construction materials such as steel and wood, concrete especially, actually degrade very quickly over there because of the high salt. Yeah, because of the humidity and also the high salt content.
The high salt content.
And plastic is in fact the perfect material. And if you can combine that somehow with something that extracts things from going to the dump, I mean, it's sort of a very successful material.
Right. So you guys started in Lisbon 8 years ago, let's say. You came back from London. And you found this company that was working with plastic.
Yeah.
So over there,
extrupalas. Yeah.
You started to create these concepts around the plastic capsule, around the non-recyclable plastic.
That's right. And then we essentially just started presenting it to a few different companies, like Nestle, for instance. We had lots of meetings with them. That was sort of our primary target. And in the end, it was never built. It never sort of latched on. Because perhaps the system behind it was a bit too complex, let's say, or a bit too much of an investment. It wasn't just sort of building up just one singular piece. It was really about creating a micro infrastructure, like a community infrastructure, in terms of collecting plastic, sending it to the extrupalas, which would extract the plastic and create the pieces and so on. But it sort of always hung around there. We actually landed in Lisbon, and this is one of maybe 7 projects that we literally just invented out of thin air, just to sort of start some action and start calling institutions and politicians and presenting our work. And perhaps they're going to use this project, or perhaps they're going to call us for something else.
Perhaps in 8 years.
And then right, and then in the end, we ended up getting other projects. We got different projects.
Yeah, you never know. It's like, I'm going to start this today, but maybe in 8 years.
Yeah, you never know. You never know where it goes. I mean, it's always just about, you just got to get out there and then see what starts bouncing back and adapting and moving forward constantly.
Yeah. So all of this, the concept that started 8 years ago, and you knocked the door on policymakers, like politicians. You knocked the door on Nestle, which is one of the biggest plastic producers in the world.
They are, yeah.
Water bottles, and now with their beautiful coffee. So tell me more about the coffee. So one of the main things that I was really captivated and really amazed by the project, the community capsule project, is that nowadays in Europe and in the States, everyone's starting to use coffee on capsules.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the amount of plastic, the amount of trash that is generated by these little things that they're not really necessary in our lives, because we've been doing coffee in a whole different way for hundreds of years.
Yeah, with burlap sacks and grinders and those kinds of things. Yeah, that's right. Well, if you want, perhaps I'll jump to the presentation and it sort of explains it a little bit more sequentially.
All right, lovely.
That's all right. Okay, here we go.
Perfect.
I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, there we go. Are you reading that? Yeah. So, to start off with, this project is always about the sustainable strategy. And in terms of a cycle, there's always clearly a production of a plastic element that happens. And in today's world, and the production of plastic is one of the least expensive items and the highest in terms of sanitation and lightness, which is why it's been such a successful material. Then there's a sale and a consumption of this product with the plastic, and so we essentially want to recycle that and create a full cycle for a product. So we start essentially with these capsules. It could be sort of any capsules. Let's just say we just kind of wanted to target coffee capsules,
Okay.
which then would be separated. And within these capsules, there's quite a few materials that we were considering. So there's obviously the plastic enclosure. There's a little bit of aluminum, hardly anything, but we do think that that can certainly be recycled. It's one of the easiest materials to recycle. And then there's coffee, of course. So the primary plastic ends up being reused and cast into these elements, which would become a building material on the left side. And then on the right side, through a natural system of composting, we could essentially be creating growth material out of the coffee grinds. And from the building material, we can build furniture, pots, equipment, and from the growth material, we can do edible, you can create food, let's just say, from the disused things. You could have herb gardens.
Public gardens, and
you can do public gardens, you can create flowers, and you can create community engagement with that kind of a vegetation. We also found that there's, especially in Lisbon, there's actually quite a lack of public spaces for people to be gardening. And that act of taking care of a garden and watching things grow has a large psychological effects and health benefits, of course.
Yeah, and as a community, especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Because something is, I have a small terrace with my plants. You surely have plants as well, but it's not the same as a community garden.
That's right.
We can all get together and do something for ourselves and for our community.
That's right, and feel proud about it, and sort of, and exchange information. Oh, this worked in this zone. We're here, and this kind of insect is coming up, but I use, let's just say shredded lime juice, and all of a sudden, that's sort of working, and that those techniques sort of move and connect. There's also obviously the psychological aspect of gardening with somebody else. I mean, that's quite a powerful social act all in of itself.
Especially if it's someone you don't know, or you're just
especially if it's somebody you don't know. No, that's right.
It's just your neighbor, right?
That's right. And it gets you to learn about your neighbor and quite literally, put down some roots and connect. Recently I've actually been watching some documentaries on fungus. Some spectacular ones have just come out. Okay. And the interconnection of all the plants underground through fungus. Where the scientists are learning huge amounts of things. The fact that plants are now communicating with each other on a very slow pace, but exchanging different chemical signals to alert each other from infections, even animals, and sort of creating defensive strategies through their underground communication systems. Something which doesn't really happen, right, if you've got your pots on your terrace. So there's sort of these multi-levels of interactions with gardens.
You create this interaction within the environment, not only on the people, but on the plant itself. You create a small environment controlled one.
That's right. That's right.
Nice. I didn't know that about the mushrooms, by the way.
I'll have to send it to you. It is phenomenal.
Sounds amazing.
So, right. So the plastic production, we kind of want to focus on that bit. So there's obviously a collection of items, coffee capsules, sort of whatever. Then there's a shredding of it, and then there's this extrusion and casting into your final product. And during the extrusion and casting, they usually add a dye, just to sort of create a uniform color.
A uniform color, yeah. Instead of having all these small, tiny pieces with hundreds of colors, just.
Yeah, which is okay. That's not bad. For some of our construction materials, that's absolutely fine. But the pieces that we're considering are going to be on display, so we at least wanted to sort of unify it in certain ways. And so, in terms of thinking of the design of the system and engagement, we really want to challenge, humanize, create an authentic experience. There always has to be some new thinking. Glocal, which is a bit of a used word, but certainly something where you're thinking globally in terms of like reducing plastic consumption, but also locally. Education is always a very big part of some of our projects, especially the community ones, and sustainable, clearly.
I really like the approach in this, especially because we're talking about plastics and being recycled as a circle, and then we want to close this circle utilizing this plastic that it's not possible to recycle. But then you said global, so it's be local, but think global.
That's right.
And I think these small projects in a small neighborhood, in one neighborhood, if every single neighborhood in the city of Lisbon, for example, will have a couple of projects like this, like 4 or 5, the outcome of this would be even greater, and the impact. So when you're creating this solution, I mean, you guys think about it. 8 years ago, most of these concepts were not on the table 8 years ago.
You know, we it seemed like what made sense for this project, right? And then so continuing on, we wanted to actually engage the society, the community with activities. So not just, as you're saying, close the loop, but since the missing part of it is really the community engagements, because we can talk about a manufacturing circle, but what we really are interested in is actually a social circle. So within that, we wanted to prioritize socializing, growing, as we just spoke about, learning, always important, recycling, playing, and exercising as well, clearly. Sure. And we, so let's put those in a circle, because we sure love circles. Yeah. And then you can take this as a system, sort of as a social system, really. And our proposal would be essentially to start off as a larger piece, but really phase it out. So as a way to engage the community would be to, let's just say, give a small piece of it, which would be the recycling phase, the recycling piece of this furniture. And then whenever, let's say, a community reaches a certain goal, let's say like 1,000 plastic capsules get delivered, or the community recycles, then you would get a portion of the bench, perhaps a sixth of the bench, and then that would come in. Then the community continues to recycle another 1,000 capsules or so. Then they get the next one, which is, let's say, exercise bench, and then so on and so forth until you finally complete your unit. And it sort of creates a bit of a sense of pride and joy within the community. If it's not just, let's say, a one-time purchase, it's a goal that everyone works towards.
Yeah, and this will definitely involve more people. Like we have only 30% of the circle. Let's keep it going so we can finish this already.
Exactly, and then perhaps some, so then it will actually stimulate some of the communities to engage other members, right? To do it, because they sort of they want to work together essentially to attain a goal.
And do that extra thing, effort just to finish it. Like let's get this done. Let's do it for our community.
That's right. And these kinds of small goals usually, these small goals usually lead always to tighter communities. Whenever there are things that everyone's doing together, they sort of lose track of small little bickerings between neighbors and issues, and it creates a sense of a tighter net, essentially, which is always a really nice byproduct, essentially.
For example, I remember when I was living in Venezuela, we did social projects in the favelas. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things we understood on communities was you have to ask what they want. What do they need? And in these particular communities, what they wanted that we could actually help was public spaces. Was painting a wall with a beautiful artwork, adding a garden, putting a basketball hoop, all of these things. And and in the end, it was a goal, and there were projects that were built within the community and with the community. That's right. I can completely relate that if this example, it's a global example. Like every single community would love to have more social space. It's a big problem in project housing, for example, in social housing, that there's no public space available. It's a problem in some big cities that there's no public space available.
That's right.
And without democratic space, we cannot have democratic societies. Like we have more isolated societies. I believe we can have more problems and not a real democratic society. So closing the loop, let's say, closing the circle would be the main goal, but also the socializing factor for these communities.
Yeah, I mean, that was very well put. The democratization of the space. That's right. Right. So here it is. Right. So we've got our capsule bench that essentially translates itself into a circular bench with a growth medium along the sides. So through the center here, you would walk in, and it creates a circular community. Let's say once a community has achieved their full recycling capacity, let's say, and then there's different pieces of the bench that can be used for different things. Some are for exercising. The ones in the back here are actually rocking chairs that we're interested in developing. And then there's this growth medium that was used from the used coffee capsules, from the coffee grinds themselves, that perhaps the community would come together and start tending. So yeah, like as you were saying, perhaps this could work maybe even more successfully in places where there aren't any green spaces, right? So this acts as a planter and as a mini garden, but also as seats and as a community engagement. And then here's just a couple versions of it, sort of like, this is out in a park, which could work. This would be halfway through, let's say, a community that's got halfway there, and it still obviously functions, right?
Functional, yeah, of course. And I really like the design, and I think it's because when I see the full design, for example, it reminds me of the conversation pits. Like you're in a full circle with your neighbors, so it enhances social interaction between people.
Yeah,
and I think
that's right. Yeah. I mean, setting in a circle is a very powerful geometry to use because it forces you to make eye contact with the other residents and the other people who are sort of nearby you. We chose this radius to be large enough so that you don't have to speak with people,
okay.
but not so large that you could, let's say, avoid their glare. So it's a very interesting dimension that we spent some time working on
figuring it out. Okay.
And then this was another, perhaps there are some very tight spaces, let's just say between buildings or something. So it could also be reconfigured as an S format. So we originally called it the COS bench, just because it was sort of a C and an O and an S format. And then it developed into a community capsule. And then this was a fragmented version, which was another idea originally. In terms of the detail, we actually took typical bench designs that we found around Lisbon, where they usually use this bent steel tube or bent aluminum tube in our case, because we'd be using the recycled aluminum. And using that in such a way, so these are actually very simple radiuses, and in terms of manufacturing, it's actually really quite an easy way to do it. And creating a pinch point so that when it's bolted to the ground or anchored to the ground, then it rocks back and forth. So it becomes a natural rocking chair. So for the chairs out of the whole circle would rock it back and forth. Right, so that was sort of some manufacturing details. That's a bit, yeah, so these are the four in the back.
Those are the four, okay, rocking chairs.
Yeah, so these essentially become 4 rocking chairs. So there's a bit of a front view. And then because, the primary material is this recycled plastic, it's actually quite easy to use a CNC machine, which can engrave information into it. And this is sort of like a next level that we were really interested in investigating, which would be certainly to out of a sense of pride, and also just as a sense of learning and information, how much, where did this bench come from? So if somebody walks across this bench, has a seat, you can actually read and understand where, this was made from, let's say, this many capsules, to the exact amount of capsules. It was recycled, dates, and even further, we were even thinking about working with local writers, or seeing if the community had let's say a historical writer and put some quotes and sort of inspirational information on it like that.
a message in it, of course.
Lots of messaging, yeah, and it could be all different kinds of messaging, really. You could even be working with some artists and doing a pattern on it. So there's quite a few possibilities with that. And there we go.
So Jeremy, for example, in this community capsule project, you're saying that in the beginning, it was, knocking the door on policymakers and knocking the door on companies. They were seeing this as almost impossible, let's say, or very hard to implement. But does the community factor, if tomorrow you want to start in your neighborhood, involving directly the community, do you think it's possible within the community without the help of, for example, for example, the state or the city? Would it be possible to implement a very first community capsule in your neighborhood?
Well, I suppose it depends, who would actually pay for the production of it, because you can get the raw materials, right, but it still needs to be translated and reshaped, and there needs to be fabricators to sort of do that. There's also a collection issue, so the community would come together, and for that, the municipality would be extremely helpful, obviously, that they would be recycling this and understanding that these pieces would be taken to this factory, the factory uses it properly. So there's like a mini bit of infrastructure there to be considered.
In this infrastructure scheme, let's say, does their coffee capsule saved by the community, like recycled by the community, sent to the factories, let's say, to the recycling lines, will be in the material that is being built, that is going to be used to build this community bench, for example?
That was a concept, yeah. Or at the very least, let's say the tonnage or the amount of kilograms of plastic would be exchanged.
Yeah, it will be we will equalize our factor. Like,
yeah,
you guys
so you would send it to the factory
of plastic, and we're using 500 kilos of plastic in this bench.
That's right. Maybe in that way, then they would be able to receive their piece a little earlier, right? Because this company is already recycling plastic and they're already kind of doing it. So you dump 500 kilos in and you sort of exchange it for 500 kilos of the types of pieces that you need to manufacture the bench, right?
All right.
So it would be sort of a one-to-one exchange. But yeah, there is a bit of infrastructure, which is why this was a bit of an ambitious project to present. There's obviously issues of collection, who's collecting, where they take, and we'd be taking collectors out of their typical routes, because the collections have their own things.
Yeah, and they cannot pass it through the typical recycling lines, because it should go to the specific plastic company that will
directly. Yeah. Which is sort of funny, because that is actually the most efficient way and the most use, which started us to think even of, the recycling systems that are in place. Perhaps they need to be adjusted to be accommodating for these types of things, filtering out plastics and then getting it to guys like these plastic like extrupulas. Why isn't that part of the municipal system?
Right.
And thinking about the Azores, especially as a closed system, if they're recycling as well, why aren't they sort of starting to consider these types of options? So we're actually quite interested in presenting these kinds of ideas to the Azorean government as well.
Hopefully they will. They will take this into consideration, and I think the efforts have been great in the last years. So maybe they're really
they have a great push towards it. And especially because of their closed system, they can really control every piece, every gram of plastic they can control, which is excellent.
So you were talking about presenting it. So you've been presenting it to policymakers in the past. You want to present it to the Azorean government in the near future, let's say. Mm-hmm. But where did you present this project that got so much attention lately?
Oh, recently we were invited for a competition in Milan for a Milan Design Week. And it was called the Guiltless Plastic, which was created by Rosanna Orlandi Gallery. And she had a big exhibition at the Leonardo da Vinci Museum in Milan during the Design Week. And she's been doing this for a few years. And her take on it was, yes, recycled plastic, certainly, but actually, what are the positive aspects of plastic? So that's why she calls it guiltless. So
Guiltless.
how do you take plastic and turn it into something that actually matches its value? The value, not as a monetary value, but in terms of its endurance, and it's the fact that it lasts 500 years, and the fact that it, let's say, saves lives. Let's say it's the most hydrophobic material, right? And so there were quite a few other very interesting projects over there, and we made some contacts and learned about a few other manufacturers that were doing similar things to the Portuguese company, and it was a great experience.
This is, and you guys were selected now, right, as one of the
finalists? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, we were selected as a finalist, and then now we've simply just sort of been selected to be sent to Qatar museums to display our project.
All right. So
and
those are great news.
And from there, we will see. From there, we're trying to work with well, we'll see.
We'll see. It's certainly a great recognition for this project. I believe this is very possible, and this could be a great solution for our cities, not only Lisbon and Azores, but worldwide. It's a beautiful concept, and as you said, it started 8 years ago, but very much likely it's been your whole life, you and Carolina, to conceive this, right? Because everything we've done in the past will, in the end, it will reflect on this. So the whole idea, the whole conception of this, it's completely fantastic. And the impact of this, like for you, what will be the impact implementing projects like this in Lisbon, for example, like direct impact?
Well, maybe I can, I think we spoke a bit about the social aspect of it, which we are constantly working on as architects, as urban planners. But in terms of the plastic itself, I love the idea of taking something that was a one-time use product and turning it into a 100-year use product, and taking advantage of all its benefits. It's almost like you're casting like an archaeological project, right? So you're using plastic 2001 or 2021, and it's cast into something, and then that thing will be around in 2200.
200, yeah.
And then by then plastic probably won't even exist anymore. They could be using funguses as packaging material, as they're doing a lot of research these days. Everything biodegradable. The idea of using plastic, maybe they will use it for energy generation. Who knows? And yeah, it could be this archaeological moment where look at that. This is kind of the turning point when they started to rethink the society started to rethink their connection with this material.
So in 100 years, it will be definitely will be the turning point. Like they will say, this was the turning point.
You see this now. This is now is the turning point.
Now is the turning point. But in 100 years, they will say, you see this bench over here? That was a turning point. 2000.
Yeah, and then they could do CAT scans and slices through it and see the types of plastic. I saw this documentary about Banksy and the fact that they started to put the Banksy, the artist, he would do these tags on these walls, and some people would put pieces of glass over some old brick wall that's sort of in a very derelict part of town, and it sort of looks really funny, I thought. And it made me think about all these other Banksys that probably got painted, or of loads of other artists, things that got painted and then probably got painted over very soon, and then maybe they got painted over and over and over because it was the back of a kebab shop or something. And then you will have these archaeologists that are going to be going through and scanning, as they do with like Da Vinci paintings, scanning through the layers of paint and
the street art.
Yeah. And dating these things according to the types of paint that were used that you could find at, a key or whatever the local paint shop was. So just this idea of embedding these items for the future is actually quite fun.
And building things that will last and will impact. Yeah. That's definitely the whole thing. And about other solutions, so in the Milan Design Week, there were other projects for Guiltless Plastic.
That's right.
Was there one that caught your eye, like caught your attention?
Well, there was a graphic design so they were split into, let's say, more physical pieces like urban furniture, and then there was some graphic design, which were quite stunning. And then this guy sort of made these T-shirts with standard texts, and they say plastic. It's for my great grandson. Like you have to think about this one bottle, because that's how long it takes to degrade. And you have to think that many generations ahead in terms of your consumption, which I really kind of made me stop and think for a minute.
He got the message out.
He sure got the message out. I hope he gets quite successful, and I hope it sort of that message gets pushed out.
Will this bottle of water of €1 that I could perfectly not use and just take water from a fountain or my own bottle?
Absolutely.
Will be worth it.
Absolutely. And then you just have to keep on thinking about, how 100 years ago we weren't using plastic. It was used. There was Duralite and a couple other types of plastic that they use now in billiard balls. But now that's like, you would call it like artisanal craft plastic, because it's a very complicated process. But before that, it wasn't really used. So how were we surviving back then?
Glass bottles.
Glass bottles are great. Are great.
And also, 100 years ago, there were not so many cars out in the streets. It was definitely a status symbol. And it was definitely something that in Europe was not that commonly used, or at least only in the major cities. So when we speak about community action and Guiltless Plastic and building community capsules to enhance community, there's also a major level of it. This is focalized policies. What about the larger policies? So we can start talking about sustainability and sustainable cities. In this case, what would be a project that you would like to share about it?
In terms of like an urban sustainability?
Urban sustainability.
Well, I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I'm going to run you very quickly through our urban project that we had designed for Ponta Delgada.
So, as a little brief, Ponta Delgada is the capital of the Azores. It's a beautiful city. It's a very small but beautiful city, but it's a city that is definitely being taken over by cars. Indeed. Completely taken over by cars. Pedestrians are ignored, are put aside. Bicycles are put aside, and the car is the king. So there's a great group of people from different parts of the world, not only from the Azores, that live in these islands and that live in the capital, in Ponta Delgada, that really want to change this. So Jeremy and Carolina, they're visionaries, and they are presenting a project to the City Hall in which we'll start in different phases to change this reality and convert our city into a city for people and not for cars. So I will be sharing the screen right now. Jeremy?
Yep. Can you see mine?
I can see it perfectly.
Excellent. We've had many conversations about this topic, Roberto. But it's as a foreigner walking around Ponta Delgada, I think I walked around there 10 years ago. And it shocked me, the fact that the cars had taken over so much. It's not the fact that the cars, because it's actually typical, the cars being used in the way that it was and having it go everywhere, which is quite normal. The thing is that the city was never designed for these cars, and the city was very tight. The streets are tight, spaces are tight. Everyone was sort of, let's say, huddling together. The buildings literally feels like they're sort of huddling together.
They're like on top of each other, basically.
Just about, yeah. And then the cars, I'm sure, came in one at a time, slowly. And then that car was beautiful and cool and sexy, and there was cow or horse manure and all kinds of, negative aspects to the horses. The smell, the stench, the dead horses, flies, I'm sure it's horrible. And so, this car coming through with diesel fumes coming out of the back probably smelled like
way
roses.
much better than the horse.
Yeah. And like, look at that. There's modernism and cleanliness and all that.
But this change, this gap, for example, in the United States, it started around the 1920s. In Ponta Delgada, probably later, the 50s or 60s.
It was probably a bit later, yeah.
But when this happened in New York City, so it's 1920, let's say, the city is getting filled with immigrants. It's a huge city with a growing population. So they have a constant demand for more horses. There's a story of a group of architects, the very first city planners, urban planners. They sit around on a big table organized by the New York municipality, and they were trying to find a solution to this. Like, what are we going to do with a horse manual? We have 800,000 people living in the island in Manhattan. So what are we going to do about it? And they spent 2 days debating without a solution. 2 days. And then the Model T arrived. So this was a bit early, sorry, not 1920s, a bit early. And then the Ford Model T arrived, and the transition from horses to cars started to pass. But now I think we also have a turning point now. We have more than 100 years with cars, and the cars are now the problem. So the CO2 emissions, the microplastic emitted from the tires of the cars are very dangerous to people. Very, very dangerous. There are lots of shocking studies from Great Britain talking about this. And our cities are completely car oriented. So now it's a turning point in which, okay, horses were a problem. We switched to cars, but now cars are the problem. And we're really trying to find a way. The answers are out there. And I think that this project is one of those answers.
Thanks. So the car issue is very similar to the plastic issue, where it is a fantastic thing. It's brought enormous changes to our societies and our personal lives. It's extremely helpful in numbers of ways, but at the same time, we've abused it in a way that it hasn't. All the negative aspects of it are starting to boil up to the surface. And as you said, this is sort of like this 100-year mark where we need to sort of look back and understand which parts of it do we want to keep and which parts of it do we actually not necessarily need. So this project sort of studies that essentially. So introduction, we have a new rhythms and types of living these days. Our population was dispersed because of the car. And so with this project, we were really interested in how to recognize the identity of this city, how to reinforce its identity, and how to translate it. Across a few different types of chance encounters, right? With human relations, new uses and activities, equipment and infrastructure, and especially cultural heritage usage. And through this, there are lots of mini sort of surgical tools at our disposal, for creating pedestrian streets, for reusing unused spaces, residual spaces, even using partial parking spaces, creating bike paths, ecological micro zones, and then shared streets.
Okay.
And through this, our goal should always be, to create more comfort for the residents, to let's say smooth out circulation, create security, and create an ecosystem essentially. And creates interaction and participation. So morphologically, this is a sort of shot of the historical center of Ponta Delgada, which is where we really sort of focused on right now. And it's over a 400-year-old city, and it's got so many layers of information on it. And what's beautiful about Portuguese cities especially is that their usage of these patterns on the ground, because they transmit history and culture and emotion and, let's say, the political climate at the time, even sometimes. And, let's just say like a general attitude, right? Which is, we love it. And so here, even just on this small sort of quadrant of the city, which is the epicenter, let's say, this plaza, on the right side, you have the church. The plaza itself was made during fascism, and there's a lot of sort of elements of fascist sort of architecture within it. On this little part here, they hired a really wonderful local artist to do a piece of art that symbolizes the workers, the agriculture of the islands. And around the church, we sort of have these stars and some interesting patterns, and you can sort of go on.
Dolphins, I think.
Pardon?
Stars and dolphins. There's a couple of dolphins hidden.
There's a couple of dolphins too. That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's all these sort of little
hidden gems.
Messages, and exactly, it's not just the architecture. Obviously in churches you can always go around to really old churches and those funny things going on, like bizarre gargoyles that were sort of, let's say, designed after somebody that the priest didn't like or something like that. And so it's we have this sort of rich tapestry on the floor. But and so our ultimate goal is obviously to pedestrianize a large portion of this. So we're sort of confronted with the stitching, whereas the road was acting actually in the favor of dividing these elements, almost into individual, let's say, picture frames.
Yeah, it's definitely three different spaces, if you ask me. From
Yeah.
what I can see and I can perceive as a citizen, I go there a lot. There's three separate spaces. There's no way to, even from the main plaza, there's no way to cross to the street. You need to go around and take a different road just to cross it as a pedestrian, which is completely crazy.
Exactly. It's not a comfortable place to walk around, and it's a historical center, which it should be. And the cars are always have priority in the zone, which I always found very strange, because there's more people than cars walking around. Some other fact. It turns out, because we actually studied the whole urban center, and we have these very precise topographic surveys and the CAD plans of all the buildings and everything. And we calculated that almost exactly 50% of all the public space is dedicated only to cars. Wow. in Ponta Delgada. So that really made us think, why is that? And if you were to sort of step back and let's just say, think of the city as your house, as many do, would you dedicate 50% of your house to, let's say, transportation? Or sort of put it another way, the car is usually used for, let's say, 5 to 10% of your day.
Right.
Why are you using 50% of your house for that? It's sort of equivalent to in your house, the bathroom is something you'd use 5 to 10% of the day. Would you make that bathroom half the size of your apartment, right? So those are kinds of the numbers and these kinds of realizations that we've been trying to transmit to people. Whereas yes, you can get dropped off right in front of the bank there, but is it worth destroying the
shared space?
The shared space, or the 40 people. Let's just say your car needs to go from stage right here, coming down this road, and cross over and then go to the left. That might take a car, let's say, less than a minute. But then it's crossing the path of, let's say, 40 people, and that car's priority sort of cut those 40 people's, let's say, walk. Is that worth it? That one guy or maybe two people in that car versus the 40 people? I mean, it's not. Right. So these kinds of priorities we're essentially trying to establish. Right. So very basically, the city itself went through quite a few morphological changes, primarily due to the car. Originally, it was actually essentially all shared streets with cobble streets. Okay. And it's something that we were very interested in returning to, essentially. There's a large evaluations that we've done with the urban sites, and primarily understanding, as you had mentioned, these three different plazas. The Matriz on the right side, which is the church, Conselho Velho, which is the primary, let's say, Portas da Cidade, which is the entrance of the city, and then Praça do Município, which is the, let's say, the cultural, the municipal
city
center.
Yes,
the city hall. Exactly. So we essentially have municipality, we have religion, and we have commerce, all right next to each other in direct contact, yet they're all divided and they're split with this road.
With a Berlin Wall made out of cars.
That's right. That's right. Tear that wall down, Mr. Gorbachev.
Exactly.
So, to further talk about this sort of stitching, we identified all of these different patterns in the historical center, and identified that some of them, obviously, we wanted to keep because they had a lot of history to it. Actually, most of them we did. And then we wanted to step back just a touch and look at let's say the typical pattern in the city. There wasn't very much, but this idea of these stripings and these parallel stripes that made these kinds of rectangles, this was, let's just say, the default or the typical pattern. So we wanted to use that essentially as our base. It was also clearly the pattern that was used on the avenue whenever that was built. Okay. That's sort of another shot of it. Yep, there it is again. And as a base, right, take that and expand. So that, as a sketch brings us to this point, right? So let's just take that dominant pattern and just put it all over the place. So at least at this point, we've started to solve our functional goal, which is to create a sidewalk that connects all of the 3 different plazas. Then we wanted to go obviously a little further than that and create a different type of a grid. This one's primarily based on views. So standing from the plaza, we created this diagrid from the let's say the pillars of the Porta de Cidade, this monument on the upper part, and then there's a big statue here, and orienting it towards the other 2 plazas, right? So you're standing in the center and you're oriented towards the municipal plaza and also towards the church. This gave us, this interesting intersections and these nice points. And within those nice points, we would introduce trees as these kinds of pillars and anchors. And whenever we have this sort of offset grid here, what's interesting is this residual space creates these triangles. And those are, let's say, open space, but still have a bit of an intimacy. And then those spaces can start to have, like, let's say, create micro plazas. And they can have communications with, let's say, these adjacent buildings, which could have restaurants that could use that space, let's say, for terraces. Now, continuing that further, we also wanted to introduce a series of pieces of furniture, permanent furniture, which you'll get a better understanding of a bit later. So all those kind of elements together, those are all, let's say, the recipes for our design. And we wanted to bring them together by using something called a stitch condition, which is essentially distortion of the grid from functional elements. So this is overlapping all of our elements together. We have intersections here, which are very complicated, these larger circles. We have these lines, which are pieces of furniture along with these circles, our trees, and so on. Yeah. And in the end, we spent a bit of time working on the geometry out, but we were essentially stitched it all together.
It looks beautiful, in my opinion. I think this is very visionary. And when people were debating about this, I was shocked about how you come up with this. I haven't saw the whole process. I haven't seen the whole process. But I think this is a great way to actually connect these 3 spaces. It's really connected now. You could see it.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. I mean, we didn't want to, get too abstract here. Yeah. We literally wanted to stitch, and there's always a lot of metaphor of an urban fabric, right? And we always felt that there are these patches, or we didn't want to patch it together to create like a patchwork quilt. We wanted to stitch it together, and we luckily had these patterns that were existing, and then our job was essentially simply to stitch it together, and so we just worked that out. So we didn't want to introduce another pattern. There were loads already. That's it. We just wanted to connect them. So it was almost a non-design work, essentially, that we tried to make it feel as fluid and as possible. And then over here on the plaza, we have these circles for the trees. We wanted the pattern to adapt around to it, right? And going from black background to white backgrounds, that it could be done in numerous ways, but this is our proposal, and this is the way that we had done it. And then we've got our 5 trees on each side,
furniture.
right?
Wow, beautiful.
And here we go. So this is a bit before and after. This is existing right now, right? So then this is after, whenever we start engaging these archways on these buildings on the side, and they start to bring out people. This is a bit on the corner, but still essentially looking down the streets. We speaking with the city hall, and they really want a kiosk here, which does actually make sense, especially since the buildings on the side currently are banks. They're banks. And we think that this project will bring, let's say restaurants and hotels and things, or commerce that will engage with people
with the
and
space.
And that'll encourage people to, let's say, sit down and spend more time on the plaza, because that's the ultimate goal. But until that happens, there needs to be a temporary solution, and so the kiosk is really the best solution for now. This is view from the church side as a before and an after, stitching it together, and now you can walk from the church onto this plaza without feeling scared, let's say.
Scared of being killed by a giant truck.
That's right. And then kids can be now, playing and running without that kind of fear.
If the city is not safe for kids, it's not safe for anyone.
That's right. We had kids in Ponta Delgada over the past few years while we were designing this, and we would be constantly, yanking him towards us because we were so afraid of the cars hitting him. He said, this just doesn't make sense. Why is this so? This is a view for the bell tower, right? And this is that view, the before and the after. And very, and in terms of, we wanted to put in a few pieces of permanent furniture, and quite simply, we just brought some of the patterns. We wanted to use the pattern itself in the ground and bring it up, solidify, and come into 3 dimensions and become a usable piece of furniture. This became a little bit different, where we wanted to create another circular bench, and although this one had a stone this time. Which creates a bit of community engagement, right? So that you're sitting around the circle and you're sort of forced to speak with other people, right? As a mini amphitheater almost sometimes.
Exactly.
And then some planters, which also would be used as a divider. In terms of vegetation, we worked a lot with Diogo, is an excellent landscape architect. And picking all the right plants. It was a bit challenging, of course, because the site is right next to the ocean and it gets a lot of winter salt winds and these kinds of things. But
I believe, like, for example, I have a big problem with Ponta Delgada, huge problem. And it comes with the trees. I get frustrated with them. So they have these trees that only flower for 4 months a year.
Yes.
And the rest of the year, everything is dark, drag, horrible. It looks like Romanian, like in the 1970s. Like I feel in Soviet Union, everything is gray, no trees.
Yes.
But I mean, why don't we just plant these? They're also beautiful when they flower.
Yes.
Put them in another part in a small forest and bring more green to the city. So I think this is actually very, very, very interesting for to get into the project, like green all year.
And there's another part of this project which we're going to present in a month or so, probably a couple months, which is the phase 2, where we're going to really pedestrianize and put lots more trees. This plaza had to stay very flexible because there's a lot of events, and so unfortunately we wanted to put a lot more trees, but this is the sort of the maximum because you needed a lot of open space for these events. But that's a very good point about the greenery. Ponta Delgada is. It's an interesting city because it's on a very natural island. It's very wild as well, or it feels that way sometimes. And the attitude of a lot of the residents is the city should be my refuge from nature.
From nature, yeah.
Which is a bit of a, let's say, old way of thinking about what cities should be. But that attitude is prevalent. So the idea of bringing too much nature into cities, for them at least, is almost like, what? That's, if I wanted that, I'd go to my, summer house in the 15 minutes away, over there in the forest. But that to say, we are certainly trying to bring as much as we want.
But also it's a city in which plants grow out of every single crack on the ground.
That's right.
So it's such a beautiful place for having a very green city. We have the right weather conditions. Believe it or not, like everything grows here like crazy.
That's right.
So it could be a very green city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would be extremely interested in making the entire city into a garden. I mean, that would be unbelievably successful. But yeah, there's definitely that attitude that needs to be, I don't know, there needs to be some explanation. There needs to be some discussion with the public. But there's certainly pushback.
But also because of the space that is available. If the space that is available has no green, it's a space only for cars, it's the door of your house. If you open it, quack, goes straight up to the street, and there's a car passing at 50 kilometers per hour.
Sure.
Of course, people will be more closed. People will find like, this is my little refuge. I will take my car to go everywhere. I will not go in the street. My kids will not be in the street. They will not play, because if they open the door, they might get killed by a car. So I think the environment itself creates this perception.
Yeah.
But as soon as we change the environment, I think it will definitely change how people react to it and the city. That's right. Yeah, and starting to build, small pieces of it to prove its success is most important. Yeah. Circulation, right? So just very quickly, as we talked about, it's pedestrianizing the city. We spent quite a bit of time on this. Obviously, it needs to work, and so as we change the circulation in the city, we actually found out that there was our best strategy was that there were these two large axes to the right and to the left, and our simply is we're actually just diverting the traffic to those main axes. And it actually doesn't increase any times, doesn't create any bottlenecks, and it works very well. They actually already use it during the summertime. During summer, and it's beautiful. I don't know. They should. It's fabulous. Keep it doing. Yeah, absolutely. So this lighter orange is the existing pedestrian streets, and we are proposing to continue that, create another finger, get horizontally as well. So not only are we going vertically, but we're going horizontally as well to try to connect as much as possible onto the sides, and then the plaza itself. And then so we, not for the plaza itself, but for the primary pedestrian zones. This is something called a coexistent zone in Portugal, which is just like this. This is in Birmingham, and was hugely successful. And it was a street that was filled with cars, and they changed the priority. It's not that cars can't go there, but the priority is now pedestrian. So you, by eliminating all traces of what's a sidewalk, where limitations, and the entire thing essentially becomes a sidewalk. Cars, it's not their turf anymore. They are not the dominant species anymore. Right? And so they need to drive they can drive, but they need to drive very carefully. And if any accidents happen, it's all their fault. There's speed limits, obviously 20 kilometers an hour. And then it's only essentially taxis, people who live in the neighborhood, loading and unloading for the commerce, and emergency services. And this means that we're not shutting down the streets. We're not completely cutting it off, because that would obviously not work very well. We're still keeping the positive functions of cars, which are this list. This is necessary. So that's what we're keeping. The transfer of goods, emergency vehicles, police, residents who live in that area need to park it somewhere. That's right. Inside their garage, let's say, or something. Yeah. So this is and they need to get dropped off, and then commerce as well. That's very important. Yeah, like transport of goods and services. Yeah, and then so then it sort of makes people think. It makes people question their need to drive a car in the zone, Yeah.
And they don't. If this is what's necessary, you give them, this is what's necessary, and the rest of it opens up to everybody else, and it becomes a public space.
And more than public space, definitely.
And there it is.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, I think we had a beautiful talk so far, and this was definitely a beautiful presentation as well. It's a project I personally believe in, and I'm a big advocate of it. I've been a sponsor of it. Let's do it. This is a thing that will benefit all of us.
That's right. That's right.
Ways that we don't even believe.
That's right.
And about the Guiltless Plastic, well, this is also a beautiful project. I'm going to be keeping track on it. And
thank you.
I'm very happy that we were able to share this, our comments, and to share the whole project to the people that will see us later tomorrow in YouTube and Spotify. So, well, Jeremy, thank you very much for coming, man. This has been a great talk, and I think we'll leave it here for today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, we share so many similar visions, and it's always good just to talk them through and try to get as many other people on board as possible.
So, yeah, let's get them on board and let's get the message out. I mean, this is a great way to get that message out and try to convince people to bring them to our side and involve them in the community as well. So together we will definitely achieve it. It will take time, but I'm sure we're on the right path.
That's right. PMA, positive mental attitude.
Exactamente. Vision and mission.
Vision and mission.
Well, Jeremy, have a good one. Thank you so much for your talk. If you want to know more about Jeremy's and Carolina Backlar, Atelier Backlar, they have their webpage, atelierbacklar.com. You can also look for
it's just backlar.com.
Backlar.com, I'm very sorry. Backlar.com. You can also check on social media for Atelier Backlar and Rua Activa on Facebook, which is a more participating urban spaces page and projects. So thank you very much for being here. This was one of our Atlantic Bikes, Atlantic Talks. We'll correct that on the film. All right. Well, Jeremy, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks so much.